Do you remember elementary handwriting paper? That paper that had the solid lines across the top and bottom and then the dotted line right in the middle? Why did we use those? Why didn't they just teach us how to write essays and letters right away? Who still uses those papers as an adult? No one. So why did we waste our time? You know what else is a waste of time? Baby walkers. They sit the baby in there and it's supposed to help them learn to stand and walk. Why can't people just teach them how to jump and run right away? Play football. Who uses baby walkers as an adult? Nobody. So why did they make us use them as babies? And another thing, scientific laws. What's in motion tends to stay in motion. I don't need to know that. Why did I learn that? Why can't people just learn how to build cars and roller coasters and airplanes? Why do they have to do this boring stuff first? What kind of biologist wakes up in the morning and says to himself, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell? None. So why did they bother learning this stuff in school? These aren't questions that you ever hear anybody ask. It's understood and accepted that these are all necessary beginning steps to help children develop the skills that they may need to use as an adult. But for some reason, nobody understands this about the recorder. The arts are funny. Everyone likes art, everyone likes movies, everyone likes music. But nobody wants to pay for it. They think it should all be free. So they steal them, download them, pirate them, whatever version of theft they're comfortable with. And everyone seems to think that this is okay. And then they complain about how modern art is trash, and modern movies and modern music are no good. Ever think there might be a connection? What's worse is that people understand that reading, writing, physical activity, science, all these are things that you learn over time. But they seem to think that it should be easy to just pick up an instrument and learn it with no previous experience in about a day or so. If you're not a musician, and maybe even if you are, try this experiment. Place your hands flat on a table or other flat surface. Now move both your left and right pinkies at the same time, but only your pinkies. Now do the same thing with your ring fingers, middle fingers, index fingers, and thumbs. How did you do? Here's another test. Try moving the finger most to the right on both your hands at the same time, but only the finger most to the right. Then move to the next finger. Next, gradually moving to the left, pairing them like that. Still good? Here's a test that only uses one hand. Take your dominant hand. Try moving your pinky and your ring finger, but nothing else, at the same time. Now do the same with your pinky and middle finger. Now do the same thing with your pinky and your index finger. Pinky and your thumb. Now do your ring finger and middle finger. Ring finger and index finger. Ring finger and thumb. Middle finger and index finger. Middle finger and thumb. Index finger and thumb. If that's all the breeze, try it with your non-dominant hand. Chances are, some of those were easier, some of those were harder, and some of them you might not have even been able to do. This is called finger independence, and it's a necessary skill for playing most instruments. This is a flute. You change pitch on a flute by covering or uncovering different holes. Some of the combinations you need to make are simpler, and some of them are a little bit more complicated. This is a clarinet, and it works very much the same way. If you don't have finger independence, it's going to be very difficult to move your fingers the way you need to. Saxophones, oboes, bassoons, and English horns all work under this same principle. So what about a brass instrument? This trumpet only has 3 keys, much fewer than the woodwind instruments. But in order to play every note, you need to be able to play them in different combinations, which requires finger independence. A standard piano has 88 keys. The average human only has 10 fingers. Many non-musicians, when they try to pluck out a tune on the piano, will peck at the keys with one finger, like how some people peck at their computer keyboard. If you want to properly play the piano, you need finger independence. Maybe you're a fan of string instruments. The guitar, the bass, the banjo, mandolin, ukulele, violin, and the cello all require finger independence. So how do you learn finger independence? The recorder. Why do we start with the recorder? Well, a few reasons. Number one, it's cheap. Children tend to lose or break things fairly often. If you're buying something in bulk for children to use, you don't want them to cost a lot to replace. Number 2, recorders are small. Many elementary children won't be able to reach all the keys of a bassoon or even a saxophone, and some of their fingers may literally be too small to cover the holes of a clarinet. On a recorder, all of the holes are easily within reach of even the smallest of students. Number 3, you can start with one hand. Most recorder literature starts with several pages that only uses one hand. In fact, I've had a student in the past who was missing an arm, but he was still able to play the recorder with his class because when you start, you only need one hand. As you progress further, a second hand is required, but you only need to focus on one hand when you're learning the instrument. Recorders are one of the best options for teaching finger dexterity to small children. And make no mistake, it is absolutely possible to continue playing more and more difficult recorder literature into adulthood. And there are absolutely professional recorder players. The reason most students stop playing the recorder isn't because the recorder is an illegitimate instrument, it's because that the music teachers are more likely to push them to instruments that are commonly used in band or orchestra so that they have more members for their class. Recorder happens to not be used as a standard instrument in band or orchestra, but neither is a guitar or a mandolin or a set of bells for a bell choir. But people don't consider those instruments illegitimate. But maybe, you might say, a child doesn't want to learn any of those instruments. A trombone doesn't use any keys. No finger dexterity required. Or maybe they want to play the drums. Or maybe they just want to sing! Well, singing and any wind instrument, regardless of whether or not they use keys, require breath control. Guess what instrument only sounds good with proper breath control? The recorder. People like to complain about the sound of the recorder, but that's what makes it such a useful learning tool. It comes with its own immediate feedback. If your recorder playing sounds like a train sliding off the tracks, you need to control your breath. Try again. That breath control assists in any wind instrument. In fact, even if you aren't musical at all, having proper breath control can help with your speaking, your sleeping, your stress, and other non-musical elements of your life. So what about drums? Well, if you are seriously interested in playing the drums, even without breath control, even without keys, you're going to want to learn how to read music. And what instrument is useful in learning to read a musical staff? The recorder. Because you only start with 3 notes, students only need to keep track of 3 sections of the staff. As you progress and learn more notes, you have to keep track of more lines and spaces. The skill of reading proper musical notation can apply to any musical instrument, regardless of whether or not it uses keys, finger independence, or even air. So, why do students learn the recorder, even though very few people play them as adults? The same reason students first learn how to write letters before they learn how to write sentences, paragraphs, essays, papers, and books. The same reason children learn to stand and walk before they learn how to jump and run. The same reason children need to learn that the force of gravity on Earth is 9.8 meters per second before they can develop a new type of parachute. It helps to teach the basic building blocks of the field in a way that is accessible to the most number of children and will apply to the most possible avenues in the field. Whether they go on to become a professional orchestral flautist, a rock star that shreds guitar, a guy doing some bucket drumming on the streets, someone singing in their church choir, or even just someone that talks to a camera on YouTube. The skills learned on the recorder help train for all of those possibilities. To be clear, there are other instruments that help with different aspects of music that are becoming more popular these days. Many schools are starting to use standard 5-gallon buckets as drums for similar reasons mentioned before. They're cheap and they're accessible to small students. These help students learn to find and maintain a steady beat, work with playing together with others, and they have less in the way than the recorder. You don't need to worry about your fingers, just smack the drum. Many older elementary classrooms are now getting ukuleles. A bit pricier, but still far cheaper to replace than guitars or standard band instruments like horns and saxes. These are most helpful to children interested in other string instruments like the guitar or the violin, but on their own can be used to teach about chords and harmony. An additional benefit with all 3 of these instruments is that they're easily available in all sorts of colors, which can go a long way in gaining the attention of a child. Can you guess what my school colors are? Modern music teachers are finding more and more ways to teach kids while being intimidated by the reaction many parents have when their students bring recorders home. Some music teachers even despise the recorder themselves, which I think is just a shame. For what it's worth, The way I run my music program is that first, my youngest classes learn the difference between singing and screaming, which has to do with breath control. This is something that most of them haven't figured out yet. From there, we use buckets to learn rhythms, and after starting with simple one-hand rhythms, we move to two-hand rhythms. They learn rhythmic notation without using a staff, and break into subgroups and learn how to play one part while hearing another. We usually throw in some boom whackers, adding a musical staff to their notation, but we color code the notes to match the instrument to make it a little more accessible. Then we learn the recorder, taking away the colors on the staff and reading it in standard form. We review what we learned about breath control from when they differentiated singing and screaming, but now we have to talk about tonguing, when to take a breath, how to properly sustain notes, phrasing. Next, we move on to the ukuleles, learning chords and learning how to sing and play at the same time. Finally, they learn the piano, utilizing everything they've learned before: rhythm, timing, phrasing, chords, melody, and singing on top of all that. That's what my elementary program looks like, and the recorder is an essential part of that. Oh, and by the way, how do students remember the letters of the alphabet? Well, the alphabet song, of course. The reason I still remember Newton's first law of motion is because my science teacher made us all sing, "What's in motion tends to stay in motion. What's at rest tends to stay at rest. I gotta find a reason why inertia's so strong. That's why I'm learning about Newton's first law." Songs help kids remember all kinds of things, like all 50 states. And while songs may not necessarily help to learn how to run, many people find that listening to music while running helps them in some way. So leave the recorder alone and instead appreciate all the art around you. Maybe don't take it for granted. Maybe don't steal so much of it. And maybe the next time you hear someone complain about the recorder, understand my frustration, because they are saying that all of those benefits are not worth a little bit of noise. I hope you learned something. I hope that you see things a bit differently now, and I hope that you'll pass this information on the next time someone disses that most useful of education tools, the recorder.